Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. In this video, we're going to talk about whether or not single leg training, such as a Bulgarian split squat or a lunge, is safer than barbell training, such as a barbell back squat. Now, this is a claim that I see many people make across the internet and social media at large, specifically the idea that single leg training is somehow safer. And I think the underlying worldview upon which such a claim is made is really misguided and unproductive. So in any case, the answer that I'm going to give you to this question, whether or not single leg training is safer than barbell training, is no. And I'm going to spend the rest of this video giving you a brief but hopefully sufficiently comprehensive answer to this question, or rather to why that is. And again, something that I want to note before we really get into the evidence that I'm going to present in this video is that it's not like there are any studies directly comparing the two and seeing which one is more injurious. So more specifically, the claim that I seek to make is that there is no real reason to see single leg training as inherently safer, and all the evidence that we do have that we can use for this question would say that there's probably no difference in injury risk. So when researchers want to see or set out to see how dangerous or injurious a given activity is, they typically measure it by the number of injuries that occur per 1,000 hours of participation on average. And there's a number of different studies I'm going to use to support my claims in this video. They can all be found right next to the claims I seek to support on the slides. So PubMed ID, put that in Google, it'll come up. Like I said, it's not like there are any studies directly comparing single leg training to barbell training, but I'm using powerlifting and bodybuilding as sort of my proxies for those. So of course, powerlifting being meant to be used as the proxy for barbell training, and bodybuilding meant to be used as the proxy for single leg training, because I think we can probably agree powerlifting is going to be a bit more dominant on barbell back squatting. I mean, that is one of the three things that comprise it. And then bodybuilding typically is going to use more isolation, more single leg, single arm type stuff. The first thing that I want to opine on here is that these numbers, 1 to 4 and 1 to 2 per 1,000 hours, are abysmally low. And I put these data down here to sort of put that all in context. So if you've got a 45-year-old coworker who tells everyone they're going to go pick up basketball after work, no one bats an eye. But they say they're going to go do some deadlifts, do some squats. Everyone thinks they're going to come back tomorrow with a blown out disc. And that just does not seem to be reality. If anything, they're about 3 to 9 times more likely to get hurt playing soccer or playing basketball than they are to get hurt on a squat rack. Now, a lot of this has to do with the predictability and unpredictability nature of these two activities. Soccer, you don't know if someone's going to come in from the side and take out your knee. Powerlifting, you can pretty much control what you do. But in any case, statistically speaking, this is the safer activity. And even with numbers this low, even though this is 1 to 2 and this is 1 to 4, I would probably call those close enough to be even. Because again, they're both so low, they're almost negligible, especially when you control for all the things that you can control for when mitigating injury risk in a given program. So with that said, I thought it'd be worth talking about why some people might make this claim and, addressing what their sort of rationales might be. There's lots that you might see across the internet. To keep this video from being too long and try in an effort to respect your time, I'm only going to address the one that I've seen the most common, and that is in regard to disc health. So briefly, your spine is basically made up of alternating segments of a vertebra, that's the bony part, a disc, and then another vertebra, and then all the way down the spinal column. The discs largely serve to act as a shock absorber, as well as to allow movement to occur throughout the spine. Now, of course, the most common and archetypical sort of injury you would see in regard to these intervertebral discs would be a disc herniation. Disc herniations aren't even really always totally relevant in regard to a person's presentation in regard to pain or function. For instance, a person can have a disc herniation on MRI and have zero pain and zero deficits in function just generally, and then not go on to produce symptoms. It's kind of a bit more convoluted than just saying you have disc herniation, you have these symptoms. In any case, though, there's this sort of historical view of discs that they're these sort of fragile things that are like jelly donuts, and if you press on them too much, the center will come out and press on your nerve roots. And there's two things that people tend to ignore with this. One, if you actually feel a disc, they're super hard. And two, and most importantly, that your discs can adapt almost like any other structure in the body. In other words, when you place load on your discs, they become better able to handle that load over time, the same way your muscles do, the same way your bones do, etc. If I remember correctly, this reference and the last three here are in regard to mechanical loading of the disc, such as a barbell back squat. And the second one, I believe, is running. I might be a little mixed up here. But in any case, if you impose stress and demand on the discs, and it's the right amount of stress, that's kind of an important part there. We'll talk about that a bit later. They will adapt and be better able to handle that stress the next time they encounter it. The same way you curled, some dumbbells, and you can curl more weight next time you try to curl some. Another thing worth noting, as far as how your legs have to work between single leg and double leg type of training, is that there's really only two differences that occur. So one, your glute medius, a muscle on the side of your hip, has to activate a bit more in single leg training to not let your knee sort of cave in and keep it in line so you can produce appropriate amounts of force. So that's one difference. And then there's also an increased demand of stabilization from like a coordination perspective when you're doing single leg training, and it's a bit less stable, so you have to balance a bit better. And there are times where this is a good thing to incorporate, but it doesn't necessarily make it inherently that much better than barbell back squatting. And if anything, if your joint angles, your angle of the knee, like the depth you squat down to when you are squatting, or same thing with your ankles and your hips, if those angles are the same, then the force felt and the stress incurred for that matter at those joints is going to be exactly the same. If the weight you're holding, if the range of motion you're using is the same, then there's really no difference in what your knee knows is going on. Now, even more important than your exercise selection when it comes to something like injury risk is this idea of load management. Now, this is a pretty broad topic. It's probably what I spend the most time talking to clients about. It's probably the most important thing when it comes to the progress and results you see and the risk of injury that you incur with your training. But the relevant part of it for our discussion here today is that for any exercise that you can do, there is some dosage that's too low to provide any stress or induce any adaptation. So, if we're going to imagine, let's say a barbell back squat, if you put a broom on your back, that's a bar too, but that's so light that nothing's going to happen. It's too low. It's not stimulating enough. There is some dosage, a bit more than that, and that is going to provide an appropriate amount of stress, not too much, not too little, and your body is going to adapt and become better at handling that stress the next time you go to do that. And then past that, there is a dosage of exercise you can put on your body that is going to be too much, that may induce a sort of fitness adaptation, such as improved strength, but also increases injury risk. And it's, excess dosage of the exercise, not the exercise itself, that matters for injury risk. And I really want to reiterate that because that's kind of the overarching point of this entire video. Any exercise, you can regress far back enough that nothing's going to happen. You can progress it back up a little bit that something's going to happen, and you can take that even further and something bad might happen, such as an injury. That's true for every exercise and really anything else you can do to your body. I mean, the same idea is true for medications as well. Medication dosage is pretty clear what that means. With this, it's not quite as clear. It really refers to, generally speaking, the volume intensity of an exercise that you do and the frequency per se. But what constitutes the right dosage is really what they should say is all these factors down here. So weights, reps, intensity, volume, range of motion, frequency, how many times a week are you squatting, how deep are you squatting, how much weight, how much reps, how close to failure you're getting. Those parts are kind of obvious. But if you slept like crap last night, then the appropriate dosage for you is not going to be the same than if you slept great last night. If you are underfueled, same thing, dosage is going to be different. If you are super stressed out from work or relationships or whatever the case is, that stress also accumulates or sort of magnifies the stress of this exercise. So it's sort of a fluctuating thing, what the right dosage is. But this is the general point that's going to dictate, how safe or how injurious or how beneficial an exercise is for you. And lastly, before I finish this up with a quick summary slide, I want to make the argument of why not barbell training is more dangerous than barbell training. So there's something you can measure called your bone mineral density, which basically measures how strong and how thick and how durable your bones are. This naturally decreases with age. One of the most commonly affected sites and commonly measured sites when a person is experiencing decreased bone mineral density and decreased bone strength is the vertebral column, your spine. If someone is osteopenic or osteoporotic, those are two different levels of decreased bone mineral density, and they experience a fall and they fracture their vertebra, within a year, that could be the end of their life. That's part of the reason why people will say that falls are so fatal, is that a person has decreased strength of their bones, they fall, they fracture, usually either a hip or the vertebral column, and then everything that comes after is itself what kills them. Or, their life is just significantly altered. Here's the thing though, bone, like muscles, like discs for that matter, like we already spoke about, can adapt. With the bone, for bone specifically, it's called Wolff's Law. Now, Wolff's Law states that when you apply a compression, a bending, or a torsional force onto a bone, it thickens and adapts and becomes stronger. It also states, though, that if such a stimulus is absent, the bone will adapt by decreasing bone mineral density. In other words, bone adapts to the stimulus you place on it, and if there is no stimulus, it's going to adapt downward. One of the unique things about barbell training is that it is probably the most effective way to load your spine itself and provide that bone growth stimulus to your vertebral column in general. So with that said, it's not unreasonable to say that arguably the most effective way to maintain your bone health of your spine is to load it sufficiently using barbell training. I'm not saying that barbell training should be the only thing you do as part of your total training regimen, but it can be a very helpful singular component for the sake of improving health long term. So to wrap up, this slide pretty much summarizes all the points that I wanted to make this video. The prevalence of injury between single leg and double leg, like barbell squatting, is probably not all that different from another. In any case, both are really super low in general. The biomechanics aren't all that different either between the two. The total load or the total dosage of an exercise is going to dictate the benefit or risk you incur more than the exercise itself. And both your discs and your spinal column and pretty much everything else in your body, honestly, can adapt to the load that you place on it. So no, single leg squatting isn't safer than barbell squatting, but neither were dangerous at all to begin with. So I'm going to end this here. Hopefully you found that somewhat helpful, interesting, or somewhere between. Any questions, comments, concerns, and please leave them down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.